Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Have you ever wondered if love can grow from silence, not sparks? Today's story is about a girl who was never given a choice until she chose for herself. Stay close, because this quiet beginning hides a powerful ending. That morning, fog blanketed the valley like a quiet shroud. The distant bell of the village church echoed softly, reverberating through Jasmine like the world itself was slowly closing in. She stood by the window, her palm resting gently against the cool glass. Down the hill, the rows of vineyard reached out beneath the pale mist, like memories tucked away in the cracks of forgotten time. Jasmine Bellini, 19, the only daughter of a violinist who once lived for music but fell to ruin in the name of love. Her father had left when she was still a child. Since then, her mother, Sylvia, had become the sole force in Jasmine's life, not through love, but through a hard grip of control and calculation. And this morning, Sylvia wasn't just making a decision. It's all arranged, her mother said flatly as Jasmine stepped down the staircase. He's a respectable man, steady. No one else would have paid off my debts. Jasmine said nothing. She had long learned that silence was safer than words when there was no space left for feeling. She already knew the man's name, Luca Devereaux, a wealthy winemaker living alone in a hillside villa surrounded by vineyards, nearly 30 years older than her, widowed, reserved, a stranger in every sense. Today, Jasmine would become his wife, not for love, but because of a contract with no room for a heart. The wedding took place in a small chapel tucked between the village lanes, so modest it felt more like a baptism than a beginning of a life together. No flowers, no guests, just the soft toll of church bells, the wind murmuring through the old stained glass windows, and two strangers walking side by side, as if fulfilling a contract signed by someone else long ago. Jasmine Bellini wore a white dress borrowed from the town's second-hand shop. The lace at the neckline scratched her skin, like a reminder that this was not a dream, but a transaction. Her eyes held no spark, only a haunting stillness of quiet surrender. Beside her, Luca Devereaux stood tall, his expression unreadable. He didn't take her hand, didn't look at her for more than a passing glance. When the priest finished speaking, Jasmine gave the faintest nod, not in agreement, but in inevitability. After the ceremony, a deep brown car carried them up a winding road toward the hills. Luca's estate came into view among the endless vineyards, its stone walls aged, its terracotta roof steeped in quiet history. Jasmine stepped inside like someone being locked in a beautiful cage. Everything was elegant, in perfect order, too polished for her to feel real. No one said, "Welcome." No one asked, "Are you all right?" Luca only opened a door and said, "Your room is this way. If you need anything, just call." And then he walked away, silently, as if this was the beginning of a story neither of them had wished to tell. Jasmine couldn't remember when she had fallen asleep. The room was so quiet she could hear the wind threading through the wooden shutters and the ticking of an old pendulum clock, steady, unfamiliar, like a borrowed heartbeat. The sheets were white and untouched, the warm light from the bedside lamp casting a soft golden hue on the ceiling. But it didn't feel warm. It felt curated, perfect, for someone else. She sat up in the middle of the night, her hand clutching the edge of the blanket as if afraid someone might come in and take away the fragile quiet she had just found. But no one came. The next morning, as sunlight crept through the sheer white curtains, Jasmine awoke to a subtle fragrance floating in the air. Herbal tea. On a chair near the door sat a small wooden tray, a steaming cup of tea, 2 slices of toasted bread, and a neatly folded note. "Good morning. I'll be in meetings until noon. If you need anything, speak to Mrs. Moretti." The handwriting was sharp and tidy. There was no warning, no sarcasm, just a simple, ordinary message. Jasmine picked up the teacup, its warmth spreading from her fingertips to her chest, to her throat, and finally to the corners of her eyes. No one had ever done something for her without expecting something in return. No one had ever left a note without hidden meanings. She sat at the edge of the bed, sipping slowly, trying to steady her hands. Her heart didn't trust yet, but it no longer recoiled in fear either. It simply paused, quietly, as if listening. The days that followed passed like a quiet stream. No ripples, no sudden turns. Luca kept his distance, never pushing conversation, never stepping into Jasmine's space unless invited. Every morning, she would find a new flower placed on the table in the sitting room. Some days it was lavender, some days wild daisies, other times a nameless bloom tucked into a small earthen vase beside a slip of paper that read, "Wishing you a peaceful morning. If you'd like a walk, the car is ready. There's no rush. Just be yourself." Jasmine read those notes as if relearning a forgotten language, the language of gentleness. She remained cautious, but the fear in her eyes no longer dictated her every move. When she passed Luca in the hallway, she no longer held her breath. When they shared a meal, she no longer stared down at her plate. He wasn't trying to make her fall in love with him, and somehow that made her heart begin to listen. One morning, she found him in the library. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a quiet glow over his shoulders. He was browsing the shelves, head tilted, fingertips gliding along book spines as if touching memories. Jasmine stepped closer, her movements slow but certain. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not forcing me." Luca turned toward her, his gaze calm, still as a lake untouched by wind. Silence stretched between them, and then he replied, low, sincere, "I just want you to feel safe. That's all that matters." Jasmine said nothing more, but when she walked out of that room, it felt as though her heart had opened a window. Just a sliver, but enough for the light to come in. That night, rain tapped gently against the old terracotta roof, each drop like a sigh from time itself. The whole house seemed wrapped in a hush, too tender to touch, a quiet Jasmine never knew could feel so warm. She stood before Luca's door, her fingers lightly gripping the belt of her robe. Her heart no longer pounded from fear, but from hesitation, the kind that comes when you're about to do something no one asked of you. She knocked. Once. The door opened. Luca's eyes flickered with surprise, then softened. "Jasmine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at him, her gaze steadier than it had ever been. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said softly, "not because I have to be here, but because I choose this." Luca said nothing. He simply stepped back, opening the door wider. His room smelled of old wood and books, warm light casting a golden veil across every surface. Jasmine stepped inside, not led, not summoned. She chose to enter. There was no urgency, no wild kisses or hurried promises, only a hand reaching for another, like an unspoken question, "Do you trust me?" And a look that answered, "I'm learning to." Luca touched Jasmine like one might touch a scar that no longer hurt but never forgot. A soft brush across her cheek, a kiss placed gently on her forehead, as if to say, "I'm here." He undressed her like unwrapping something sacred, not to claim, but to honor. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as though one misstep could shatter something fragile inside her. Beneath the amber glow of the lamp, they lay side by side, hand in hand. No one said, "I love you," but every breath, every touch, whispered it anyway. That night, Jasmine understood. Her body was not a debt to be repaid, but something worthy of tenderness. And in the stillness between two heartbeats, something began to bloom, softly but unmistakably real. After that night, nothing changed immediately. There were no bright smiles in the morning, no dramatic words of love, but small things, very small, began to appear, like the first signs of spring after a long, cold winter. Jasmine started wearing her hair down more often. She no longer avoided Luca's gaze when they saw each other in the kitchen. He didn't say much, but now he always waited for her to sit before beginning his meal. They shared breakfast in silence, but it was no longer heavy silence. It was a quiet kind of understanding. One morning, Jasmine walked into the sitting room and saw Luca sitting by the fireplace with a newspaper in hand. His eyes paused now and then, not really reading. Deep lines etched across his forehead, his hand clutching the paper slightly too tightly. For the first time, Jasmine realized he was tired too. Without saying a word, she went into the kitchen and made a cup of tea, the way he once had for her. When she returned, she placed it gently on the table and softly rested her hand on his shoulder. Just a light touch, like the wind. Luca looked up, and in his eyes there was no image of power, no guarded strength, only a man learning how to soften. He didn't speak, he only exhaled, a deep breath as if for the first time he allowed himself to release it. That afternoon, the sky hung heavy, as if carrying a truth not yet spoken. The last rays of sun quietly slipped behind the hills. Jasmine was organizing a few books in the library when she heard the slow, measured footsteps behind her. It was Luca. He didn't speak at first. He stood by the window, his gaze drifting toward the autumn-cellaring vineyard beyond. "There's something I need to tell you," he finally said, voice low. "Something I should have told you sooner. About your mother. About the real reason for this marriage." Jasmine lifted her head. Her heart skipped a beat. Luca turned, and in his eyes wasn't the usual calm, but a deep, restrained sorrow. "Your mother, Sylvia, she's in the final stage of cancer. When she came to see me, she didn't beg, didn't cry. She just said, 'I won't be here much longer. I can't leave my daughter alone.'" Each word fell heavy, sinking into Jasmine like stones. She stepped back, gripping the edge of the bookshelf as the world tilted slightly beneath her. All her resentment, hurt, and anger crumbled, giving way to a raw, aching realization. The next morning, she left the villa. Her mother's house was just as she remembered, small, sunlit, quiet. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like the last place still holding something she once lost. Sylvia lay on the bed, so thin Jasmine's heart ached. When she entered, her mother turned, trying to smile. "You came back," Sylvia whispered, her voice as soft as mist. "Mama," Jasmine choked, tears falling faster than she could catch. "I'm sorry. I thought you didn't love me. I blamed you." Sylvia reached out, her hand trembling but still steady in its love. Jasmine rushed forward, kneeling by the bed, wrapping her arms around her mother. "I was just afraid I wouldn't have enough time to be there for you," Sylvia said, breath broken. "I knew the way I chose wasn't what you wanted, but it was all I had left to give." Jasmine held her tighter, her tears soaking into the shoulder of her mother's gown. "I understand now. I'm not angry. You did everything for me. I just wish I'd seen it sooner." Sylvia smiled, the first smile without strain. "As long as you understand, that's enough." And in that quiet embrace, where their tears blended into one rhythm, Sylvia closed her eyes, softly, like a leaf falling to earth. She didn't leave alone. She left in the arms of the daughter she loved more than life. Luca never left Jasmine's side during the funeral. He stood behind her as she cried over the casket, held her hand when mourners came, and stayed beside her in silence as dusk settled over the cemetery. He said nothing, but his presence, quiet, steady, was the only thing that kept Jasmine from falling apart. After the funeral, Jasmine returned to Luca's villa, not out of duty, but because she needed space to steady herself again. The house was as quiet as ever, but inside her, everything had changed. One afternoon, Luca took her to the winery, the place where everything began for him. There were no employees, no formalities, just the two of them, standing in the sunlit wooden room. In his hand was a small black envelope. "Jasmine," he called her name for the first time since her return. "I once took your freedom with a choice that wasn't yours." She looked at him, no longer avoiding his eyes. "And today," he continued, voice calm but certain, "I want to give it back to you." He opened the envelope and handed her a stack of documents, the winery, the villa, the entire estate, now in her name. Not out of obligation, not to keep you, but because you deserve to choose for yourself. Jasmine stood still, not because of the value, not because of the land, but because, for the first time, someone was handing her the power to choose with no fear, no conditions. "I don't need you to stay," Luca said, eyes never leaving hers. "I only need you to know what you want." She stepped forward, gently placed her hand on the folder. "I do," she whispered. "For the first time, no one is choosing for me, and I choose to stay." They left the villa on a soft spring morning. No farewells, no ceremony, just an old pickup truck, a few boxes of books, a basket of flowers, and two people sitting side by side in silence, not to escape, but to begin again. The new house sat at the end of a dirt road, beside a still, quiet lake. It wasn't grand nor polished, whitewashed walls, a red-tiled roof, sea-green shutters. But the moment Jasmine stepped inside, she knew. This wasn't property. It was home. "I don't need luxury," Luca said, setting down a box of books in the living room. "I just need a place where we can be ourselves. No roles, no weight." And they began not with big promises, but small acts. Planting flowers by the porch, picking paint for the bedroom wall, hanging the first photo they took together above the fireplace. Every evening they sat on the wooden steps, watching the lake shift colors beneath the sunset. Few words were spoken, yet within those silences, something full, something healing, quietly bloomed. Before the seasons turned, there were many evenings of quiet reflection. Jasmine would sit by the window, a book untouched in her lap, listening to the breath of the lake. Sometimes Luca would read beside her. Sometimes they just listened, not to music, but to the sound of peace growing roots. The seasons changed once more over the quiet hillside, and the jasmine flowers she had planted now bloomed in gentle waves along the porch. The days passed unhurried, uneventful, but within each one, the most extraordinary thing had grown. A family. After all these years, Jasmine no longer measured time by her wounds. She counted it in shared meals, quiet gestures, and the laughter of a child echoing through a home that once held only silence. Matteo, their little boy with eyes just like hers, now ran freely through the garden, calling Mama, Papa, with laughter as clear as sunlight. One evening, Luca brought Jasmine out to the porch, where golden light stretched over the lake, like time learning to breathe slowly. He didn't need to say much. In his hand was a silver necklace, strung with 5 small stones, one for each year they had walked side by side. Not loud, not perfect, but real. Not for the worth, he said, but because each year was a kind of miracle. Jasmine took his hand and held it tight. "I once didn't believe I could be loved," she whispered, "but now I know. Love doesn't have to strike like lightning. Sometimes love doesn't roar. Sometimes it's a seed, buried, growing, becoming a life, not loud, but lasting." If this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever felt love grow where you least expected it? Until next time, keep your heart open. You never know what quiet miracles are waiting. And maybe, somewhere in your quiet life, love is already growing, not loudly, but deeply.